So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, our pre-conference webinar on developing an ergonomics prevention program. We are really excited to be offering this webinar for you today, as well as to have the upcoming Durham Ergonomics Conference. This is a conference, we've never done anything like this before. We're trying to reach out to more companies and organizations, specifically in the Durham region, but anyone, of course, is welcome to join us at that event. Just trying to get the word about ergonomics out there. We know that ergonomics has a huge positive impact on people's ability to be successful at work, reducing workplace injuries, improving people's organizations' bottom lines by obviously if you have reduced injuries or reduced costs. You also keep your experts on the job longer, and quite honestly, that is a value that nobody does a good job of putting a dollar amount to, but we know if you have a really highly skilled expert individual on the job, it's going to give you the best opportunity to be successful, right? It's going to save you money because they know what they're doing. They can make decisions on the fly. They know how to troubleshoot through problems that otherwise would create, if you're in a manufacturing world, would create downtime, or if you're in a utilities type world, you have to have a second staff member out there. You do a lot more training and shadowing with a new individual because they don't have the experience to be able to answer the questions on the fly. So we believe that the ergonomics program is sort of the first piece in that process, and it's critically important in order for you to be successful moving forwards with making change and improving your workplace setup. So we're going to spend some time today going through essentially the different pieces of the ergonomics prevention program. So what the agenda is going to look like is really I'm going to talk about sort of some basic or fundamental pieces. We're going to talk about the support element. So as you prepare to enter into this, if you don't have a program already, or if you do have a program, you're going to go back and revisit these things, is what support do you have for your program? Is your upper management in support? Is your frontline managers and supervisors in support? And is your frontline staff even helping you identify hazards and making change? So we want to talk about the support piece and the goals you have for your program and how you set those, what kind of things you want to look for. And then obviously any ergonomics initiative, just like any other health and safety initiative you're going to do, needs to assess and evaluate the things that are present. So you need to assess and evaluate the hazards that are present in your jobs to determine whether they're safe to continue doing as you've been doing, or if there needs to be that last piece, that step 5, which is the improvement and the change. And we're even going to wrap this up and add one extra step here. Once we make those improvements, we're going to close the loop, right? We're going to go back, we're going to revisit, we're going to make sure that the changes that we're making are actually addressing the issues that we identified in the steps 3 and 4. So those are really sort of the 5 essentially fundamental steps that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to add a bunch of pieces in as to how you can build that support, how do you generate it, what kinds of goals do you want to set, how do you assess and evaluate these hazards, does it need to be complex, can it be simple, right, and what types of improvements do you want to be making. So we're going to look at all 5 pieces because these are the foundation or the building blocks in order to having a successful program. So starting off, some sort of general concepts or general thoughts is who is backing your program externally. So there will be people in your organization, hopefully, that are backing your program internally, but where do you get the support? Ergonomics still isn't legislated in Ontario. It's something that is relatively limited and can be quite frustrating at times. But because it's not legislated, some companies and organizations don't see it as mandatory. And unfortunately, obviously it isn't mandatory, but it should be something that we're considering. The statistics from the WSIB's annual reports are still staggering. Greater than 40% of workplace injuries are sprains and strains. And we can take that one step further and look at where areas of the body that these sprains and strains are happening. And it's places like your low back, your shoulders, your hands and wrists, right? Joints. And we know those injuries are ergonomic related. They're about repetition, they're about force, they're about posture, right? So although there isn't any legislation, just one second here. I can just hear someone in the background there. So somehow, there we go. Just a minute, 1 second, Joy. I'm still hearing someone in the background. Sorry about that. I think that problem is solved. I apologize for the short delay. So people who are backing your program externally. So you have these individuals. There is no, sorry, getting back on track there, there is no legislation in place right now that says you must do ergonomics. But the statistics and the injury stats are telling us that we need to be doing them. We need to be making change. We need to be improving our workplaces because these are the #1 types of injuries that almost every industry is experiencing. So although there is no formal legislation, there are some things, depending on what type of environment you work in, there are some things that we can use to help support our program from an external perspective. So let's look first at what the Ontario government is doing to help support our program. Probably, oh goodness, now I'm dating myself a little bit, but coming up on 7 or 8 years ago now, the Ontario government started to work on developing the MSD Prevention Guidelines for Ontario. So these guidelines, there are 5 pieces. There's a part 1, 2, and then the third section is actually broken down into 3 books, A, B, and C. And each of those books is, geared to include a whole bunch of tools and guidelines and resources for you. So it's a great reference tool. And when we're talking about building a program, it's important that I bring this up because the MSD Prevention Guideline for Ontario is really about building a program. It's talking to you about what steps you need to include, what elements are important to have as part of that. So it's really, if you haven't seen these yet, you should definitely get a hold of them and take a look. There's a resource link on our website under our resource page, and they're free and downloadable. You can, a little bedtime reading anytime that you would like, but they can be a great tool to help you get your program off the ground. If you've never done anything related to ergonomics, or if you're still sort of in the infant stages of figuring out your ergonomics program, this is a great resource tool that you can reference. Although there's no mandate or legislation that says you must do this, we do expect that this guideline is a good indicator for what you can expect to see when there is going to be legislation at some point. There has to be legislation. We can't have these staggering numbers of injuries and nothing come of it. So when the legislation does come through, we are expecting it to follow these guidelines. So if you've never seen those, once again, they're available on our resource page, and I can always send them out to you as well if you'd like to have a copy. They are a great way to start sort of building the foundational blocks of your ergonomics program. If you're in an industry that uses ISO standards, there are some ISO standards related to ergonomics. I have them listed there. So ISO 159, different pieces of that. 9241 is another section that you may find as a good reference tool. Talks about basic ergonomic principles, then moves on to some of the more design elements, so ergonomics of the human-system interaction. So what happens when somebody has to interact with a piece of equipment that they're presented with, right? That ISO standards help to address some of the methodology and ways you would want to set this up, things you want to consider in that interaction. And then obviously ergonomics of the physical environment, the way a workstation is laid out, for example. So there are ISO standards that help to support your ergonomics program. So if you're in an industry that uses ISO, then those are areas that you might go to support your program from an external perspective. The CSA also has a standard. Most specifically, the focus has been on office ergonomics. That's probably the most widely known CSA standard. And that CSA Z412 is office ergonomics. And there are additional elements in there or pieces of different programs, of different CSA standards that you could use to support your program as well. And those ones are listed there at the bottom. The occupational health and safety, hazard identification, elimination, and risk assessment and control, psychological health and safety in the workplace, and workplace ergonomics. So you can see that there are some CSA standards that help to support this as well. How thorough and detailed they are may vary depending on the type of work site that you have, but they are definitely things that you can reference as well. So there are some external pieces supporting your program. If you're someone who's struggling to find support at your organization to do ergonomics, but you know it's important, you may go back and reference some of these materials and start to build a case as to why you should be doing it, and perhaps more importantly, what the return on investment is, how are you going to get that money back by making those changes. Just as importantly as external support, we also need to talk about who's backing your program internally. This is one of those most important pieces as we start to build a program from scratch. And if you already have a program in place, you likely have you may be the health and safety person or HR person responsible for health and safety. So you likely have that health and safety manager support, right? That they are driving the program, they're helping to make change. You may even have an ergonomist on staff or someone who has an ergonomic background or an ergonomic specialty that is able to support your program, giving you that feedback and insight. I know I have a couple clients online here today joining us for this webinar, and some of them do a fabulous job of reaching out to me, right? They don't need me all the time, right? As much as I would love to be needed, they don't always need me, right? At ProErgonomics, our goal is that we help you make your program sustainable. You don't need us for everything. There are definitely things internally that you can be doing on your own to identify hazards, to address office ergonomic concerns. Those are relatively straightforward ergonomic issues. So the clients I have on today, a couple in particular, do a really wonderful job of emailing me or calling to ask a quick question. For example, hey, I have this person in the office environment who has this specific injury. I'm thinking about this product. Do you agree? Is this a good fit? Do you have another one that you would recommend? They have the tools internally to be able to make those initial evaluations. They want me to be a confirmation tool, essentially, right? So for a quick shoot me a quick email, a quick telephone call, and bang, they're able to make that change internally at no cost. They didn't hire me to come in. They're just looking for my advice and input, which we are always happy to provide. We want you to do some of these things internally. We believe it's important, and your program will benefit by having that having someone drop in and do ergonomic assessments and leave doesn't make a program sustainable, right? It doesn't make change happen. And that's really one of the biggest changes, is that I often go in and do an assessment and it's like someone's checking something off a list. Right? I need to do an ergonomic assessment of this task because it's on my list of things to do or to accomplish, or it's on my performance key indicators or my performance indicators for the year. So I need to get it done. But that doesn't mean that anything actually happens with that change, right? So having someone on staff internally who's supportive and engaged and has those background in ergonomics can be hugely beneficial to building confidence in your program. You may also have an occupational health nurse. You may be an occupational health nurse. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm not sure actually who joined online. We may have an occupational health nurse with us, and they can be great resource tools as well. They have some knowledge and background on sprains and strains, on posture, on physical demands of a job. They have some of that knowledge. So if they can be a key part of your team to help you build that support internally as well. So once you figure out your support program, that's going to allow you to take the next steps in actually building a program, right? You need to have the support in place first. Your upper management needs to buy into why this is important, right? And I think your injury stats are probably your number one motivator here, right? If you can show that, we've had, that if you follow industry standards, if you follow WSIB standards and say 40% of your workplace injuries are ergonomic related, if that's consistent at your workplace, if you can even prevent 10% of those injuries, if you can get your ergonomic injuries down to 30% instead of 40%, how much savings would that 10% be, right? Let's say your ergonomic injuries are costing you, I'm going to do easy math for here today, right? Say your ergonomic injuries are costing you $100,000 a year. If you're a big organization, that's probably a realistic number. Might even be more than that, right? So if they're costing you $100,000, you're able to reduce them by 10%, you're saving 10 grand, right? Year one, right? So that sort of building that business case for this, right? Not only are you saving those 10% of injuries, you're saving that $10,000 every year from here on out, because that 10% of those injuries are going to be prevented. So you sometimes need to build that business case in order to get that really good, strong ergonomic foothold in your workplace. In my opinion, too often ergonomics is actually a retroactive thing, right? I get called in to do assessments so often because there's been an injury, right? Somebody was out doing something, they've been injured, they're trying to bring someone back to work, or now they realize this job is a disaster and they want to make sure that they're making change, right? But when you call me in after an injury has occurred, it's too late, right? The injury's already happened. It's already cost you a lot of money to have this employee off work, right? It costs way less money to have me come in ahead of time, make recommendations for change, and actually make some improvements, reduce the risk of that injury ever happening, right? So that business case is really important in building that ergonomic support. So I wanted to talk about this slide briefly, in particular because this slide is really looking at two different ways to approach sort of ergonomics. On the left there, where I have listed as the framework, what we're looking for is, what we're looking at essentially is straight from the MSD Prevention Guidelines from the Government of Ontario, right? So they're identifying that these are the various steps in an MSD prevention program. So they build it into 6 steps. You can see sort of from top to bottom, they need to establish a foundation for success, identify hazards, conduct an assessment, make change, implement controls, and then follow up and communicate results, right? Those are the basic 6 steps, probably in just about any program really, is that we need to build the foundation, identify the problem, implement a control, and follow up and sort of communicate our success. And the way that we do that, we can do that in many ways actually, but one of the ways that you might do that is implementing this plan, do, check, act process, right? That in each stage of the MSD prevention program sort of coincides with one of the different stages of the plan, do, check, act process. So, for example, establishing a foundation for success, establishing a foundation for success is about the planning stages. In that stage, you're going to set up your team. You're going to figure out what tool you're going to use, right? There's all different pieces that go into planning for success. The hazard identification and conducting a risk assessment, that's the do, right? You're actually going to evaluate the hazards. You're going to determine what kinds of risks are present in a job. That's the do piece, right? Then we get down later on where we're evaluating the success, right? So that's obviously connected directly to the evaluate piece of the process, right? So plan, do, check, right? We're actually going to evaluate the change here. Is it the right fit? How did the process work? Those kinds of questions. And then the last piece will be about standardizing. That's where the act comes in. So planning is in building the foundation, right? Do is about evaluating hazards, conducting a risk assessment. Checking is following up on the program, whatever change you've implemented. And then the act is about communicating those results, standardizing the system, and moving forwards. So let's look at each one of those a little bit more closely. So in the plan stage, we're looking at determining what you want your program to do on a detailed level, right? So if you are at the very beginnings of developing your program, and I imagine some of you with us today are in that stage, if you're at the very, very basic beginnings, we want to know what exactly you want to achieve from a very detailed perspective. So set specific measurable targets. I think this is an error that a lot of our companies make. They don't actually take the time to set out a target. You want to reduce, for example, you might want to reduce workplace injuries by 5%, ergonomic related injuries by 5%. You might want to make take on 3 ergonomic change initiatives in this calendar year. You might want to improve productivity on this line by 5% by implementing ergonomic change. There are lots of different evaluation tools you might use and might find beneficial, but you really want to be clear as to what you want your program to achieve, right? Because you could evaluate your program in lots of ways depending on what your individual needs are. So figuring out what you want to actually achieve has a huge positive sort of goal-oriented process, right? It creates this opportunity for your staff and your team and your upper management to evaluate your success. Are you actually achieving what you want? Did you reduce your injuries by 10%? Did you increase productivity by 5%? You can quantitatively evaluate that, which gives you a great measurement tool to go back to your upper management team with. They want numbers. They live in a number-based world, right? They're always looking for measurables. So we want to make sure that our program gives them that, right? Our program for ergonomics shouldn't be wishy-washy, right? Think about it like a business program, right? You need to set clear targets, clear goals, clear things you want to achieve. And you do that by making them measurable, by giving them numbers or data, right? Which is hugely important. One of the other things that we think is important is planning on having involvement throughout the company, right? Ergonomics is not just a health and safety issue, right? It should be involved on different levels. For example, your ergonomics, if you have an ergonomics team, which I'm going to talk about here in a moment, right? Who needs to be on that team, right? There are all kinds of different people that might be relevant on that team. But your ergonomics program itself involves many different areas, right? You're going to have your frontline staff because those workers need to be involved in the changes that are going to affect their job. You'll be shocked at how many have some really fabulous ideas on how they can improve their job or a task, right? My business partner, who isn't with me today, often jokes that one of her professors years ago said, if you see duct tape at your workplace, figure out why. Because chances are good one of your employees has figured out a better way to do something. And so they've modified their workstation or a task in some way, by throwing a little duct tape, adding a, impromptu shelf, right? Something to make their job easier. So figure out why they use that duct tape and then figure out how to make it permanent, right? They have some fabulous ideas, so use them to your advantage, right? We also obviously want to have involvement from all levels. So that's your frontline staff, your health and safety person is going to be involved, right? You also need somebody on your upper management team, some sort of supervisor or management rep on that committee who is supportive and engaging. Quite honestly, they're probably the purse holders, right? They're the purse string holders. They're the ones that are going to be able to fund the initiatives that you want to or get funding for the initiatives that you want to accomplish. So they need to be involved in the process, right? Ideally, they still allow for the free flow of ideas and movement and opportunities within that team when they're brainstorming. But ultimately, when it comes right down to it, somebody has to present this to management. And quite honestly, involving your team, yes, but making sure your management group is on there as well is important. One of the things we feel is vitally important and what a lot of our clients are still lacking is actually having a written policy to support your goals, right? We know that having the steps, taking the steps and the time to really plan and build a program can be incredibly time consuming, right? Having a policy or program when nobody has mandated that it's required is something that gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, and it sits on the, on the back burner. You'd like to do it, it would be great, but you don't always get there. So when you start to develop a policy, it doesn't have to be the be-all and end-all. It doesn't have to be everything it's ever going to be. If you're brand new and don't have a program or a policy in place at all yet for ergonomic issues, then start small, right? My advice would be to start small, do something relatively simple. Your policy can change, evolve, and grow as time goes on. And what I would actually probably most recommend is that you don't even have to create a brand new program. Right? Probably the simplest and smallest way to start is to use a program that you already have in place, right? So you've got a health and safety policy about how you identify safety hazards and how you manage that hazard and how you mitigate the risk, right? The process for going through those things. That's a perfect place to build ergonomics in. Why start from scratch, right? Why not use what you already have in place? Use that health and safety policy and add an ergonomics element so that you're addressing those ergonomic injuries as part of that policy, right? It doesn't have to be a standalone program. It can definitely work within the exact existing system. So we realize that's not easy, right? I'm saying things that, in grand scheme of things, if everything was perfect, you'd have a program, a policy, everything would be running smoothly. But we know that that isn't an easy process. Getting the buy-in, getting the support, sometimes even having the time to physically write down the policy can be really challenging. So we believe that it's very important you spend quality time on that plan in order to ensure your program's effective, right? And perhaps more importantly than even effectiveness, your program has to be sustainable, right? It can't be something that you go in with great guns, you've got this fabulous idea, you want to write this program and policy, but when it comes right down to it, it's so big and so grand that you can't actually sustain it. There's no way that you can do the frequency of evaluations that you've set out to do. You can't possibly address the number of hazards that you want to address in the given timeline, right? We need our program to be realistic and very sustainable. It should be built into your existing policies and procedures so that it's easy to sustain. If you're already doing workplace inspections, add ergonomics to it. That's sustainable, right? The sustainable element is that you're already going out and doing an inspection. It's part of your normal routine. It's mandated. You must do it, right? So you go out and you do an inspection, and now you've added 5 questions to the bottom of your inspection, or 5 points to the bottom of your inspection checklist, right? So now those last 5 points address ergonomic hazards, right? Or the first 5, or wherever you throw them in. But those last few points address ergonomic hazards, making them sustainable, right? We don't want you to get started just to have to start all over again when things splutter and die, because we don't have the background and support we need in order to be successful. So that's it. To help you with this, my partners and I sat down before this webinar today, and we really thought about what we wanted to do to help companies get off on the right foot. So what we've actually created is we have a special free gift that we're excited to give away on this webinar today. We really believe that this gift is going to be to your advantage to helping you build and advance your ergonomic program. So I've got lots of details at the end of the webinar about what's going to be included in that. So stick with me until the very end, and you'll be hopefully pleasantly surprised about the kind of tools and strategies we're going to be able to give you to help you build and advance this program in the way that makes it sustainable, makes it practical, that you can actually move forwards with implementing hopefully tomorrow, so you can get yourself off on the right foot. So I started to highlight a little bit on the last slide the importance of choosing your team, right? Ergonomics is not a standalone thing. Health and safety isn't a standalone thing. You don't operate in a bubble, right? That your team is built around a group of individuals who are, actively working together to help make change. So the question I want to ask of you is, who are your champions, right? Your champions should be your employees. They know what changes will work. They know what things they would like to see. It's very rare, we believe that your employees are so important that I don't go in with the idea that I am the expert and I'm going to make all the decisions about how to improve your job. One of the questions I always ask when I'm at a work site, when I'm doing a risk assessment, is, what is the hardest part of your job? Right? And they give me some kind of answer about what the hardest part of their job is. And then I'll ask questions like, if you could change one thing about your job to make it better, what would it be? If you have an idea, what's your idea, your best strategy for how you think you can make this task or this issue better, right? Have you tried anything in the past? Are you doing anything already that are making this job or this task better? I use, as someone who is deemed the ergonomic expert, and I will say that I am an ergonomic expert, I even use your staff, right? I ask them some important questions because I believe that it's important that they get a say, right? And that they have some really fabulous ideas on how to make change, right? So hopefully you're already doing that. They are the experts on their job, so use them to your advantage. Ask them what their challenges are. Ask them what their ideas are. These people spend all day at their job. Right? If they didn't think about how they could make their job better, I'd be surprised, right? If there's parts of their job they don't like, I guarantee you they're thinking about what they would change or how to make it better. So they're a great resource to use. I already mentioned your management team needs to be on there. I don't know that I talked about maintenance and engineering in particular, but they are a great and a very important group as well, right? That your managers, or excuse me, your engineers and your maintenance team, they can do a lot of things in-house that don't cost very little money, right? It's being designed in-house. My business partner, Alex, I was talking to her last night. She was doing an assessment yesterday, and it was actually in an office type environment in a municipality, and they were looking at like a 911 operator station. It's not exactly what it is, but very similar in nature. If you can picture that, they had 5 or 6 screens, and they had a chair, and then they had a keyboard and the dispatch panel, right? And so they are trying to figure out how to make change. And one of the things that they were talking about is, the keyboard's at the wrong height. It doesn't work for the vast majority of people. They're challenged by this. How are they going to make it work? Yada, yada. And they had some great solutions and ideas and interests, and ultimately what their solution came down to is that they don't need any specialized equipment, that the best solution is to have their engineering or their maintenance team come in and build a platform, right? I'm not going to get into the exact details of this assessment in particular, but the solution was to their engineering team to come in and build a platform. They don't need to buy a $500 keyboard tray or a $300 keyboard tray, right? Or a fancy new height adjustable workstation. What they really needed was a platform that would support their keyboard in the right position in relation to this dispatch panel that they had to use. And so ultimately the solution, right, is, I'm going to use the word free. We know it's not exactly free because our maintenance and engineering time is important, but essentially is a free in-house change, not buying any new equipment, and that's going to be the solution to that problem. So they need to be an important part of your team because they can give you great insight as to what they can do, what they can't, what kind of cost and timeline you're looking for, and timeline is sometimes super important, right? How long it's going to take to do an initiative. And then obviously I've already talked about your health and safety and your ergonomics professional, right? In order to make this team really work, we at the PROwebinar realize that the most important part here is education, right? All these different champions and elements and people in your team need to know what kinds of training that each one of them needs, because they need different things, right? Your employees need different things than your maintenance or engineering staff, perhaps even different things than your health and safety professional needs, right? So we want to make sure that in order to make your program sustainable, you need to have some folks in-house who have the ability in order to identify hazards, make change, make good quality, high quality recommendations, right? Although obviously I don't want to say you can do it all yourself, because that would be putting me out of a job. We do believe that companies don't need us for everything, like I already mentioned, right? So some of our clients are doing some great work using their ergonomics team to their advantage, right? This could be by the way, this doesn't have to be an ergonomics team on its own. It could totally be a joint health and safety committee, right? Whatever, team you think is most appropriate to manage this issue is great, right? But if you train your committee members to be good at identifying your hazards and coming up with solutions for change and tasks, give them the ability and the authority to have involvement in those changes, you'd be surprised at how much you can actually accomplish in your team, right? So to really make your program sustainable and do as much in-house as possible, right, this is an area that you may want to focus on, right? And we actually believe that this topic is so important, we've gone even further and dedicated an entire hour of our first ever ergonomics conference just to participatory ergonomics. How do you get the team involved? What kind of training do they need? How do you enable them to create, give them the information and the tools they need to create action? So if your existing team, is struggling to get some traction at your workplace, or if you don't have a team in place yet, but you're thinking, you know what, that's something maybe I could use, then that session at our Durham Ergonomics Conference will be of huge advantage to you. You'll take away all kinds of great strategies on what you can do to get that team actually making change, positive change in your workplace. How do you create them? How do you train them? And how do you use them to your advantage? So that would be a great session for you to join us for at the Durham Ergonomic Conference. So if we're looking at actually getting sort of that bubble set up and setting targets and goals, I want to talk about what best in class looks like when you're actually doing assessments. So firstly and foremost, obviously removing or eliminating a hazard is a proactive thing, right? So you've identified that there is, let's say there's a 80-pound lift that someone is required to do, or two people split the lift because it's so heavy, right? That if we can eliminate that lift, that obviously is a proactive approach. But if we're looking at decreasing injuries or doing that in response to an injury, then that's retroactive. So we want to move into that proactive phase. We want to start to assess those hazards, evaluate the issues so that we can make change before the injuries happen. We know it's a cost savings. It can be a hard sell. I realize that, but it can have a huge positive impact. If you can improve efficiencies, and again, this applies to every work environment. I think it's a little easier to evaluate in some than others. For example, in a manufacturing environment, if people hired me and I made everything slower, right, yes, everybody was safer and in better position and whatever, but if I made everybody slower, a manufacturer would never hire me back, because for them, it's incredibly important that they're efficient, right, and that they're fast. The faster they get a product out, the more that they can make in a day, therefore the higher quotas they can get, the bigger sales they can have. So it's super important that we are improving efficiencies, which makes us ultimately more productive. And it's pretty incredible what we can do with related to this. When you think about efficiency and related to ergonomics, what my goal is in terms of ergonomics is to reduce the amount of awkward posture that someone was in. So I'm going to reduce, you could actually do like a time study, right? And I'm going to reduce the amount of reaching that you're doing, because reaching is a hazard, right? It's creating an awkward shoulder posture, maybe an awkward back posture. It's also very inefficient, right? Now I'm wasting time reaching rather than wasting time doing assembly, or rather than wasting time repairing something that I'm working on. So I want to work on improving those efficiencies, which makes us more productive, right? So if we can work on removing the hazards, decreasing injuries, and improving efficiencies, we're in pretty good shape. Obviously, we want to be ahead of the curve if humanly possible and look at innovation. What kinds of innovative tools or strategies can we use to actually make change here so that we're leading our industry or leading our group in order to actually, have a huge positive impact on our injuries, on our, productivity. All of those things can have an opportunity to be improved there. One of the things that I think is sometimes overlooked as well is the importance of integration, right? That if we do a really good job of integrating our ergonomics program across all departments and processes, that's going to give us the best chance for success, right? Health and safety doesn't own ergonomics on its own. If I want to make a change, I'm going to have to send it to engineering. So they're an integral part of the process. Upper management needs to pay for the change if there's a cost associated with that. So they're an integral part of the process. Procurement may have to go out and procure something. If I'm, interested in a new lift assist or something being installed there, they are the ones that are going to lead that piece of the process. So integrating ergonomics in your program, the actual policy and program you write into all the different pieces and areas, basically telling every different department and individual what their role is. Right? So your department, your engineering team, what is engineering's role in this process? They're expected to sit in on committee meetings, provide advice and support to the ergonomics committee who's attempting to make change, provide timelines and cost for delivering these different initiatives that are coming out of that committee. They have a very clear steps and they're actually listed as part of the policy, right? So we're not just pulling them in at the end. They're a key integral part of the program. They've been built right in the language that we've used to develop it. And goal is that it's systematic. If your program isn't easy, nobody will do it, right? If it adds 15 new worksheets that people have to fill out, if it's complicated to work through those, they're not really sure what they're doing, right? They're not going to continue doing it, right? It'll be the first thing to go. So it needs to be systematic, it needs to be straightforward and something that is easily implemented. So things you might use to evaluate your program as you go forwards right now, look at your program and determine whether the conditions that you have currently set up, right? Obviously, when we're talking about programs, something that is unacceptable means you probably don't have a program, right? You recognize that ergonomic injuries are a significant part of what you do, but you don't have a program, so therefore that's probably an unacceptable level. Right, tolerable is you set up a very basic program. It's not customized to you. It now meets, well, in this case, legislation, maybe not legislation. It meets standards. It meets guidelines about what a program should include, right? But it's just sort of meeting the very basic elements of that. It's acceptable when that program meets the conditions according to industry standards. So you start to look at and customize your program to your industry, to your injuries, to the things that are present at your workplace. And then obviously it's optimal if it actually takes that one step further, allows it to be proactive instead of reactive in nature. It creates a system on how you approach all these different hazards that you're identifying, right? So if you want to look at your program right now, think about yourself. Do you think your program is unacceptable, is tolerable, is acceptable, or do you think your program is really optimal? My best guess is that if you're on with me today, your program probably isn't optimal. You're here listening to this webinar because you would like your program to be better. You think there are some opportunities for improvement. It doesn't mean that you don't have a program, but you may be looking for ways that you can make some improvements or changes, right? So if you're in that boat, then hopefully you're finding you'll find that free gift that we have at the end of the session today really of value to you, right? That you're able to pull some really great resources and be able to start making change at your work site, start building some new things into your program and policy as we go forwards. So probably the most important part of the key element, so that was all the sort of the plan stage. So I'm going to backtrack 1 second. So we look at the plan to check, act process. All the stuff we've been talking about so far is all about the planning. It's about the program, the training, the team that needs to be in place. And we're at the 40-odd minute mark of our presentation, and it's clearly, I've spent a significant amount of time on it because it is hugely important to setting yourself up for success, right? Which is why we've dedicated pieces of our ergonomic conference to it, right? You need to be set up for success in order to even begin this piece of the process, which is actually doing the assessments, doing the hazard identification, and making change or implementing controls, right, to eliminate those hazards. So in the do category, we want to talk about how you're evaluating your hazards. How are you tracking this? Right? Who is tracking it? Is it the health and safety person doing it all on their own? Are they out, evaluating the hazards that are present, or are your management team or your supervisors or your frontline staff or a health and safety committee, are those folks helping you to identify your hazards? So that's where those workplace inspections that I've already indicated come into play, right? That you can use the stuff you already have in place. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Just think about how you can update your current practices to include an ergonomic piece, right? Add a question, add a couple statements into these programs to give you some ideas on how you can actually build this in, make it sustainable, which is always the most important. At least that's our message to all of our clients, is that it needs to be sustainable. Right? You may do hazard audits. You may actually go out and do sort of a more formal audit process, looking at not just your quick workplace inspections, but a more formal process of what hazards are present, right? And obviously, I've already mentioned how important your employee feedback is, right? Your staff can give you some great tools. If your staff are complaining about something, that's a good place to start, right? For many reasons. Not only are they going to be really happy that you have, I heard what they've had to say and are in there trying to make change, right? But it actually can give you some really great insight onto what hazards might be present in that job. If everyone's complaining about this challenging lift that they're doing or this challenging push-pull that they're doing, it identifies some ergonomic issues maybe are there, and this gives you an opportunity to sort of approach those, hopefully from a proactive perspective. If you want to take that to another level, right? So you're evaluating your hazards. These are relatively informal ways. Workplace inspections, an audit of the hazards, employee feedback. We're not actually evaluating any of those hazards, right? All we're doing really is identifying the hazards. If you want to take it to the next level, you can start to be a little more proactive, right? You can look at design reviews and engineering. So, think about a manufacturer bringing in a new line to their facility. Think about a municipality, roads crew or facilities person of some kind is getting a new piece of equipment, right? How do you engineer or create a purchasing standard so that you get the right product, right? With some of our municipality clients, the purchasing standard might be incredibly important. We did an assessment about a year ago, about a year and a half ago now, timing-wise, as one of our municipality clients was heading into a winter season, right? And they were having some challenges bringing an employee back to work, and what they were essentially having is they had this individual who had to get into a snowplow and drive this large piece of equipment. And so they realized very quickly that certain snowplows, right, certain large equipment worked well for this person and certain ones didn't. And they were trying to figure out which trucks they could assign him to, essentially, to allow him to come back to work safely. So what they learned in the process, and what one of our major recommendations were, is that they actually need to create a purchasing standard, that there should be some basic sort of minimum guidelines that they're looking for when they're buying a new truck, right? There are some parts of those trucks that were incredibly non-ergonomic and other ones that were actually pretty good, right? So we want to make sure as part of that the purchasing standard sort of was stemmed from the engineering/ergonomic assessment, right? Is how do we retrofit existing vehicles? How do we make sure we get equipment in the future that is an ideal match for what we're doing, right? And that applies to any equipment that you may have to buy. My business partner, Alex, actually developed a great purchasing standard for one of our local colleges, right? Looking at their office environments. We want to make sure you get the right product, so let us help you pre-select some of the right pieces. So they pre-selected some chairs that would be a good fit for the vast majority of their staff. They pre-selected some footrests that had good range of motion and adjustability. They pre-selected some keyboard trays, right? Creating a purchasing standard saying, if you need a keyboard tray, these are the 3 that have been approved by an ergonomic professional. So choose one of these. It also helped them get a great price, which is a huge bonus, right? The cost of our assessment would have been saved very quickly in the cost savings they got by saying, we want you to be an exclusive vendor for our keyboard trays. What's the best price that you can provide us? And that allowed that company, that college, to get good pricing on all the different pieces of equipment, because now they're bulk ordering equipment sort of throughout the year. Every time they order, they're ordering the same piece. So those companies are willing to give them a better deal too, which was a great tool for them to be able to access. And then obviously the last piece, we want to be proactive, so getting in there, doing assessments ahead of time, right, trying to make change, actually evaluating risk with a more formal risk assessment. And that totally depends on the approach that you're going to take, which we'll look at in a second. So I want you to standardize the evaluation process. I want you to look at what checklist you're going to use, what process or flow chart is included as part of your program so that everybody knows what their role is. Everybody knows, okay, we did this assessment. This is the 3 recommendations we've come up with. What happens next, right? Does it go to engineering? Does it go to procurement? Does it go to another area or another department to have a conversation about how it fits with the flow of the overall workplace, right? That process or flow chart helps direct and keep the initiative moving, right? Once you actually create a recommendation, you want it to keep going. So you want to make sure that you have a strategy on what happens next in the process, right? And ideally, you have some way to create a more centralized system. Where are you going to store all this information so that you can easily, at the tip of your fingers, pull up the information you need to reevaluate something, to review the data. Is so often we find that the data gets spread out into multiple areas, multiple files on the drive, and sometimes it gets lost in amongst all the other things. So create some sort of centralized tracking system for all the information your team is creating. So I mentioned earlier about training, and we do believe training is super important, so I just want to highlight quickly some examples of what types of training. Not everyone needs the same training, right? Everybody has different roles in the process, so they all need different things. So your managers and your supervisors, they need hazard identification training, right? They need same thing with your frontline staff. They need hazard identification training. They just need to know what they're looking for. If they're out on a work site, what should they be concerned about, right? That's the kind of stuff they need. But your engineering and maintenance team need more. They need information about how to design a workstation, what sort of recommendations or tools are you going to use to make sure you get the right height and the right layout, right? So they need some specialty training. Your ergonomics team probably needs some specialty training. How do they fill out the assessment tool that you've selected? How do they conduct an assessment? If you have them doing an assessment, you want them to understand how do they complete that assessment so that it's nice and consistent. You might even add a control element in there. In fact, I think you probably would, right? What sort of controls would you recommend for any given situation? So you want to make sure that your training piece is comprehensive, but also customized to meet the needs of the different individuals' roles in the whole process. So I just want to highlight a couple of quick examples. For most of you, if you're doing this in-house, if you're creating a program that you're going to make sustainable, you're going to create a simple risk assessment tool, right? Basically, the diagram I have on the right there is straight from the MSD Prevention Guidelines, the Ontario MSD Prevention Guidelines I mentioned earlier, right? And they do a really great job of looking at it from a simple perspective. You don't need an in-depth assessment if everybody agrees, right? If the hazards are understood and everybody agrees what they are, you can move on to identifying the root causes. If you've agreed on that, then great. Move on to actually making change. You don't need to have a professional come in and make all these recommendations and run risk assessments and evaluate hazards in a very formal way, because your team has already agreed that the issue was this lift that has been happening that's 80 pounds. You don't need me to tell you an 80-pound lift is terrible. You know that, right? So if you know that lift isn't great, everybody's identified the root cause is the actual physical lift or the height or the position or the body posture or whatever, right? But they've identified some root causes. And if they've agreed on that, then start moving forwards with making change, right? You don't need me for every piece of the puzzle. So if you have some sort of simple piece, this is a sort of a flow chart that you might have or some version of this in your policy, is that if this happens and we all agree, we're moving on to making change. Now, if at some point you don't always agree, then you might move on to looking at an in-depth risk assessment. Is this worth changing or not? How risky is this hazard that we've identified? Right? And so we believe that probably one of the key elements of a program is getting the hazard identification piece right. Your team needs to properly identify the hazards, or it's going to miss things, or just as importantly, it's going to overemphasize things and you're going to waste lots of valuable time and resources on something that was never an issue in the first place, right? So you want to make sure that you properly identify your hazards, and before you can put your team to good use actually making the change, right? So this can seem really daunting, especially with a manufacturing job. It's a little more straightforward if somebody's working on an assembly line because it's short. They only do a small amount of stuff in a given 30-second timeline, let's say. Right? But if you're looking at a municipality job or an engineer or a maintenance person, it gets quite complex because they're doing a lot as part of it. So the question we often get is, where do we start? So to address this question, we've included a really great tool in your special gift today that I'm going to talk a little bit more about at the end of this webinar, and hopefully that will help streamline how you can build things like simple risk assessments into your workplace to get your ergonomics team off on the right foot. We really want you to get going and actually get traction and moving forwards, because that gives you the best opportunity to reduce your risk, right? So that special gift, that tool as part of our special gift today will hopefully give you a lot of attraction in that area. So that said, if you conduct a risk assessment, if you get to that stage where you need something formal, then you're going to figure out who you want to you conduct that assessment. It might be someone in-house, it might be your ergonomics team, it might be a consultant like ourselves that you bring in to help you out with that. So you just need to figure out who is going to conduct the more complex risk assessments, and that's part of your flow chart and your process as well, right? If you get these no's and you need to do a more formal assessment, who's going to do it? What's the timeline for completing the assessment? What happens once it's done? How do we move forwards? So those are the plan and the do pieces of the process of putting into your program into place. I want to spend just a very brief amount of time on the check and the act pieces. So in terms of a check, we're looking at evaluating the process and evaluating the control, right? Especially if your program is new, right? And even if it's not, but especially when your program is new, you want to make sure that you're evaluating the process. How did it work? Were all the key players involved? Did you gather all the right detail? Did you identify all the right hazards, right? Figuring out how to address all these different pieces, you need to evaluate the actual process. But you also equally need to evaluate the control. So often I go into a work site and the control is there, right? It's fabulous. You go in, you see a lift assist, it looks great, it would be a fabulous tool, and nobody's using it, right? You've probably all been there at some point. You give them this great tool and strategy, right? Change their work method, do something, and you go back and check on them to find out how fabulous your new recommendation is, only to find out they're not using it, right? And so that's sort of an indicator that there's something wrong, right? That we've missed a stage, we've missed a step, we missed a piece, that there's something about it that isn't working. Sometimes it's simple as adjustment. I asked an employee at one point, well, why don't you use the lift assist? And he looked at me and he said, well, you go to use it, the load jerks, like it jumps, right? I go to lift that box with the lift assist and I, hit the up button and all of a sudden it's like, whoosh, I'm way up. And that's not ideal. He says, so, I feel like it's more of an injury risk than it is anything. That shouldn't happen with the lift assist, right? So we did a quick evaluation and the problem was it wasn't adjusted properly. So it wasn't set for the weight of the load. So it was expecting a much heavier load than it got, so it jumped, right? And so we made some quick adjustments and all of a sudden that tool is totally working for them, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually checking and going back. That's the close the loop piece, right? That we're reevaluating the process, making sure the process works smoothly, reevaluating the control. Is it the right fit? Did it increase injury, right? Did it decrease injury, do what we wanted? Are the employees using it? Are there any kinks or bugs we need to work out, right? So we definitely need to go back and do the check. The last piece, the act, in this case, is really about standardizing. So once we have tried this a few times, we're going to go back and we're going to standardize that process. So once we actually standardize it, we say yes, give it the stamp of approval. This worked great. So now we're going to move forwards with that. You've standardized your process. You're going to move on to the next job task that's going to be evaluated and start the whole process over again. And for the first few in particular, you're really going to want to go back and look at your process and make sure it works, especially when you change styles of jobs, right? Some of you will have, many of you, in fact, probably all of you, have office workers and office workers as well as folks who are in a manufacturing facility or out in a municipality on your roads crew, parks, who are engineers or, in the field doing some kind of work. And the process may not work the same for all the different types of jobs you have. So you want to make sure that you have the process working and you want to standardize it based on the types of work that you have involved. Okay. If it didn't work, obviously you're going to revisit, and I want you to try again, right? Don't give up just because it didn't work. Reevaluate the process, change, standardize to make sure that you get it right the next time, right? So the last two pieces, those check and act, are really about confirming that the process is working properly, the control is good, and standardizing. Once you've decided, that this is the good fit, standardize the process, update your policy to reflect what the new sort of system is going to be so that everybody knows what to expect every time they're presented with an ergonomic related issue. So just revisiting back to that one of the very first slides I had up there, right? We're going to, if you build a program that has all these pieces, if you do a good job of planning, getting your training and all things in place, right? That'll allow you to do a good job on the do piece, right? Identifying the hazards and controls, because your team knows what they're doing and how to handle it. So those two pieces will be huge foundational pieces for you to be successful. And the last two pieces, the check and act, are really, for me, more about making sure that everything works the way it's supposed to work, right? We want to make sure we get all those pieces included. So I want to thank you for being on the webinar with us today. I've mentioned the Durham Ergonomic Conference several times throughout the webinar because we're really excited to be offering this event. It's our first one. We're really pumped to be reaching out to this group and helping you advance your ergonomics program, right? So this is our first conference of this kind. We believe it's going to be an awesome way to help organizations just like yourself take their ergonomics program to the next level. Or maybe if this is you, to get it off the ground the first time, right? If you're not there yet, we can help you figure out how to get started too. So as I mentioned, I believe that it's important that you spend time training and learning so that you can advance this ergonomics program. And the conference sessions really have been designed to do exactly that for you. So we've chosen sessions that are essentially, we've split it up. So there'll be 2 sessions in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And in each time slot, you're going to choose one of those sessions. And each session, each time slot has sort of a more introductory session as well as a more advanced session. So you're going to get those 2 options. So even if your program is brand new, there is something for you. If you have a program that's been going forever, we have something for you too, right? That you'll be able to add new pieces, get new ideas on how you can make your program just that little bit better and address those concerns you're having just a little bit more, right? So we know that there are going to be companies of all stages in their program in the event, and like I said, we planned accordingly. We also know that there's going to be a whole variety of different organizations and types of work that's present there. So when you look at those sessions that we're offering, you will, first of all, they're presented by our certified professional ergonomists on staff. So Alex, Sarah, and myself, the 3 owners of PROergonomics. Really, we want to make sure that you know that you're getting an expert talking about the issues that you're having. I would venture to say that between Sarah, Alex, and I, we've also worked in just about every industry that you can think of. So I guarantee you that if you have an issue or a challenge at your workplace, one of us will be able to have a great conversation with you about how you can use some of the information from the the sessions that you've been to, or if you want to address something in a different way, we can give you some tips and strategies on how you can make it happen. Okay. So basically, we want that session. We want you to leave that conference with the resources that you need so that when you go back to your organization, you are ready to get started reducing your injuries, reducing those sprains and strains immediately. You're improving productivity immediately, right? And ultimately, if you can get those 2 things going together, then you are going to, have a great strategy to introduce your upper management to improve your bottom line. Okay. So as we mentioned in our registration emails, sorry, I got lots of information for you today. So as we mentioned in our registration emails, we're giving away 2 free registrations for the Durham Ergonomic Conference just for attending the webinar today. So thank you very much for coming. We believe that taking the first steps and taking action is probably the most important part. So I'm excited to have an additional bonus for all of you that are on the webinar today. In addition to giving away those 2 free registrations, which I will do a draw for later today and email those individuals, we want to express our appreciation for taking the first step and taking action and improving your ergonomics program. So to do that, we believe that you may need more, we want your team members to be involved. We want you to have the opportunity to invite someone else to join us. So for everyone that registers for the conference within the next 24 hours, so you have it, 24 hours to get the conference sorted, right? It's only a cost of $79. It includes some really great reference material as well as some other things that are listed on my slide. But for everyone that registers within the next 24 hours, we're really pumped to be giving away a second registration for free. So if you would like to bring someone else with you, right, you have an idea of who that might be. It can be from your organization or a sister organization, another site perhaps, you think you'd both benefit. We will give a second registration away for free. So to take advantage of that great offer, just register yourself online, and I'll send out an email today with the information in it. As soon as you get yourself registered, shoot me an email. Just reply to that, and let me know who your guest will be, and I will make sure to get them signed up as well for the complimentary registration. So this could be a really cool way for you to get a chance to see all 4 ergonomic sessions, right? You bring 2 people, one of you goes to one session, one of you goes to the other, and you're bringing home 4 great sessions worth of material back to your work site, giving you the best opportunity to make a significant change. Right? Not only that, I've got listed on my slide there, we're going to have some amazing take-homes, a hot lunch, and probably most importantly for some of you, you're going to get continuing professional development points for your various designations. So that might be super helpful to you as well if you're an HRPA member, CSSE, CRSP. We're in the process of getting all of those sessions registered with them so that hopefully we can get you some continuing professional development points as well. So last but not least is your special gift. In addition to the great opportunity to attend the conference and the opportunity to bring a guest like I just mentioned, I want to talk about that special gift I've been mentioning throughout the webinar here. So right after this webinar, I'm going to send out a resource package, and this is going to help, a goal is to help grow and support and advance your ergonomic program. So I'm going to give you a sample MSD prevention policy. So if you have a program in place, compare these two things and determine whether it's a good fit for you. If you don't have a program in place, this will give you an idea of the kinds of language you can use to get started in developing that policy and actually improving your program. Right? To do that, I also want you to be able to evaluate your existing program, right? Whether you have one or not, you're going to get an ergonomic program checklist. And that essentially says, do you have this in place? Do you have that in place? And you're going to go through checking off the different pieces so it'll quickly identify some gaps that you may have. And that'll give you an opportunity to plug those holes so that moving forwards you have all your ducks in a row and you have a program that is really addressing all the different pieces. And last but not least, you want your ergonomics committee or yourself to be able to assess some ergonomic hazards or musculoskeletal disorder hazards. I'm going to include an MSD hazard identification checklist. So you can review that, get it up to speed on what you can include and what you can have your staff actually going out and evaluating. So it'll ask you questions like, is there lifting greater than 30 pounds or 50 pounds or whatever the number may be? Is there awkward postures? Are people bending forwards? To what height do they have to work to? Those are the kinds of great questions that are going to be included in that checklist. I would encourage you to use that checklist and steal from it, right? If you already, I mentioned earlier, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't introduce a new checklist if you already have some stuff in place. Compare that checklist to what you're already doing, steal some pieces, add it to your workplace hazard identification, workplace inspections that you're probably already doing, add those in there, and that'll give you some really great resources as well. So we believe that these tools are going to be fabulous for you and maybe your committee, if you've got a committee, to use when you evaluate your existing policy and program and deciding what direction you want to go next, because ideally we're always moving in that positive direction and we want to give you the tools to do just that. So I apologize, I run over by about 4 minutes. If you have any questions, I want to give you a chance to ask them. I have some time here, so I'm definitely going to stay online with you. There should be a question box in the sort of the menu option there. Feel free to type a question in and I will happily respond as we go along here. One of the other questions, okay, question just come in, is asking what other types of sessions are we offering at the Ergonomic Conference, and that's a great question. So I mentioned the participatory ergonomics session. We're also going to spend some time talking about hazard identification in more detail than we did today, and we're going to talk, sort of one of the more advanced session will be about the design element. So how do you build design principles into your program so that before you implement a new tool or equipment or before you change a workstation, what sorts of things do you need to do in order to make sure the design is working for you as best as possible? All right, so that's a great question. So it looks like I was crystal clear today. I don't see any additional questions coming in. Like I said, I'll be on for another minute, so feel free to shoot me an email and watch for my emails later today. The first one will include the resource package, which is our free gift, our special gift for everyone today. I'm excited to share that with you. And then later on today, I'll send you an email which includes the registration information and reminder of the free, if you register within the next 24 hours, the free registration that you can bring a guest for free, which we're excited about offering you as well. Someone's asking if there's a copy of the presentation going out, and yes, I will include that with my information today. We'll post this on YouTube with our other webinars We do free monthly webinars as well, so if you're new to us, you can join us on one of our free webinars. All the topics are on our website in the events section. You can join us for any that are relevant to your role, and we will make sure that we send out the presentation YouTube link this afternoon as well. So you'll get that today too. Okay, everyone, so I'm going to say thanks so much for attending. It was a pleasure having you on, and we look forward to seeing you take ergonomic action and join us at that ergonomics conference. Let's get your program up and running and working in the direction that you want it to go. Thanks so much again, and I hope you have a great day.